Welcome to the Inner Athlete Podcast, where we discuss all things youth athlete development and youth mentoring.
I guess the other part is the parents. Obviously, we've spoken bits about the parents so far. And it's like a lot of the parents want to support their kids and their development. And there's different styles of parenting and whatnot. Some of them are very hands-on, some are very hands-off. Some of them literally try and plow the way to, future success. I know you've literally got a book on this, like that, literally the manual, the gospel for it. What are some key things, about your book and how it can actually guide parents into, fostering the direction for their kids to succeed?
Yeah, and I'm glad you did raise it, because one of the reasons, I'll give you two reasons of background for this for the listeners who don't know this. So the first one is the reason why I decided to write The Sporting Parent is because for that 15 years, 17 years, whatever it was that I said that I was working in the development setting, was I pretty well got sick of hearing teachers and sport coaches in the community all say things like, oh, you wouldn't believe what this parent did. You wouldn't believe what this parent said. And in my mind, I was thinking, it's been 17 years of me coaching at that level and I'm still hearing the same things. Something has got to be wrong with this. And we as coaches are underestimating or undervaluing what our knowledge is for parents. Okay. So that's the first thing. So how we can try and communicate that better is the first thing. The second thing was, at that same time, I had a son myself. Okay. So by having a child, I actually realized where this misguided passion came from and love came from for parents, because no parent is trying to do something to intentionally fail their child in what they're doing. They're not setting them up to fail. What they're doing is they're trying to set them up for success, but it's a combination of misguided judgment with passion and love for their child. So you put those two things together, and yeah, it might seem fruity in instances, but it's a bias to try and get the best out of their child. So by me writing The Sporting Parent, I wanted a one-stop shop for parents to go to that could easily digest each chapter, going, okay, well, is my son or daughter different to how we grew up? Yes, they clearly are. Why are they different? These are the reasons for it. And then how do you overcome that? And more importantly, what do those lessons that we've spoken about previously, how do those lessons transfer to life? So it's not only about, is my son trying to get into or get a professional AFL contract? It's, if we're going down that path and he's talented, how can I foster it? But if not, what sports do I choose if I wasn't active myself as a parent? I want them to play sport. What do they choose? How do we go about it? And what's the best for their development? So I tried to blend it together in one, like you said, one-stop shop and easily digestible manual for any parent to be able to read. And that's why it's written in layman terms, that hopefully if you've never read a book, you'll be able to get to the end of this book. And that's the goal for it. So the goal for every parent is making sure that their son or their daughter is physically active early, and then they can dabble in sports that they're passionate about, where they become intrinsically motivated. And whatever that definition of success looks like, it might not be the same for one family as another. You guys as a family unit figure that out. But if you've got those tools to understand that it's about early engagement, sampling, and then being involved in some sort of athletic development throughout those stages to supplement it, then that's a win right there. And if your son or daughter remains active for life, then pat on the back to you as a parent. I think you've done a fantastic job.
Yeah, I think the sampling is actually an interesting part. We dabble in different sports because it allows you to try different sports. You're like, this sport's not for me. And it's like, I remember growing up, I was a real big, heavy kid, right? I was fat, essentially.
Yeah.
But I played basketball. I was okay at basketball. It was the running that really gassed me. Then I tried some other sports. I lost a bunch of weight. Then I ended up transitioning to rugby league. And that's when I really found my stride a lot later on. I think I was like 15 when I first started playing. And
there you go.
Then my development started to really kick off from there as well. It wasn't until I tried different sports and realized, there's areas that I need to work on personally, then tried the sport that, my family's, been heavily involved in for many years, got into that, and then I actually really enjoyed it because I was doing really well. And then by playing other sports like, basketball and soccer, I did martial arts for a little bit as well. even just being in the gym, it's had a general base that I could transition to other sports and be like, because I've dabbled in those other sports that I knew that weren't for me. Eventually, I knew I have like a list in my head of the things I'm pretty good at, the things I'm not really good at. So avoid the sports that have those things, then go into the sports that have the things that I'm good at.
Yeah, and I think you've hit it on the head, because the reason why, to me, that is a great definition of success, because we always talk about the sports side of it, and you've mentioned it there, but what a lot of the time is overlooked is to do with what type of sport is good at a certain stage of maturation or personality type of someone's child. So a good example would be, if they're more introverted in nature, then you might try and get them involved in a team sport, and they experience it. They get to experience the social dynamics and things like that. They might not enjoy it, and that's okay as well, but at least they're exposed to it. And then they might go down that individual sporting route. But then you've also mentioned in there too, a couple of things that I found really cool was that you've mentioned about the footy side of it. Okay. So that you've got, hand-eye coordination and things like that are involved with it. You've got contact with it. You've also mentioned that you realized as an individual what your strengths were. And this is what it's about. It's actually about setting the child up to realize what they're comfortable with, what they perceive to be good or bad at, and what direction can be. You've mentioned a key word there being transferable across sports, because if you've even mentioned martial arts in there as well, it's individual, it's about building resilience, it's about discipline. So many of those things can be transferable to another sport. And then by you saying that you've come from a family, that participate in, if it was rugby league, a family, a lot of the times what you'll see is the first sport that a child will play will be that the family or the dad or the mum has a heavy affiliation to. So the child doesn't get a say in it. It's, I'm either playing soccer, I'm either playing football, I'm either playing netball because my mum did, I'm doing gymnastics because my mum did, whatever it is. But hopefully you can try and take a step back from it and go, okay, you know what? Let's play rugby league, but let's do swimming as well, because swimming can help with the cardiovascular system and things like that. So the more sports you explore, every one of them has a benefit to it. But the key point that you're talking about there is how they transfer to each other when the individual themselves, their self-perceived ability can flourish in any one of those sports as well as they get to go down the further path of the sporting journey.
Yeah. I want to ask your take on this, actually. There's, a lot of sporting coaches will use like suicides or broncos as a form of punishment. What's your take on that?
So I'm laughing because I still use exercise as punishment, okay? And I'll explain why, because I full well know that the challenge that lies in this is that people and the research will say, don't use exercise as punishment because people or the children will resent physical activity because of it, okay? Now, I think a big part of this is it's like anything. It has to do with context, okay? So it's not necessarily about using exercise as punishment is bad, you shouldn't do it, or alternatively, let's not do punishment and let's make it a positive experience all around. That there's a blend in the middle for this, and I'll explain why. Is because my largest coach to athlete ratio, I think it's about, from myself, it was like about 1 to 85 as an individual myself. I've got friends and colleagues, and I've probably even done it myself. I'm thinking 85, but there's got to be instances where I know individuals are faced with 1 to 100 students, okay, of how do you manage that? So trying to finger point each student who's done the wrong thing, get them involved so it's a positive experience, giving them tasks and things like that where they can positively contribute to the session so that they're not punished for being late or punished for misbehaving. You try and do that with 100 students when you're the one person there, okay? So the reason why I'm saying it is because you can still make the sessions fun, extremely engaging, but there's also a level of accountability, okay, and expectations. It's not about punishing them excessively, whereby they're hurting, they're on the ground, they can't get up. That's absolutely a no-go zone. Okay. But there is still nothing wrong, I feel, as a coach, in that if there's a level of expectation and that line has been crossed or that level of expectation hasn't been met, then there might be a physical, it might be deemed as a punishment, but it could be something like 5 push-ups. It could be something like 5 burpees or something like that, where they're not resenting it because they're on the ground and they can't overcome it. If anything, you're just further providing more repetitions and things like that to help them. So there's a win-win in both parties. I just think the challenge with the research that comes out, and also when people make sweeping statements about it, is I think there needs to be a balance within the context of the confinement and the environment that you're working in. And that's how we do it from my experience. We have challenges and things like that, where if you use the term punishment, we don't term it a punishment, but this is the expectation. You haven't met it. What are you going to do as a consequence of that? This is what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to do it. Cool, you do it. Let's go. You're on. I'm looking after the rest of the group, and then we're back on. So that's just my personal opinion and experience with it.
Yeah, what about team punishment? Say if 2 players are late, then the idea is that get the group to hold, or the captains and the group to hold those 2 players accountable. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so I think you need to be really careful with this, because depending on the age and the maturation of the athletes, that can lead to things like bullying and things like that, where if it's at a senior level, then those senior athletes usually will keep the way I coach at a senior level is that I want the athletes to rule the roost. Okay. So what I mean by that is if as a S&C coach or a technical coach, if you're the technical coach isn't out there catching the ball on the weekend and kicking the goals themselves. So if you're a technical coach and you're trying to hand feed or spoon feed the athletes up until game day, they're never going to win a game, because they need to figure it out themselves. And so at that senior level, players holding each other accountable, then that might be an option. Yeah, absolutely. These 2 people didn't make the mark, or these 2 people cheated in a game, then your team is punished for it. This is what the punishment is. But if you're dealing with 10-year-old boys or 12-year-old boys, then the last thing you would want to do is the structure or rules and things like that you've encouraged leads to boys going back to the change room and, getting bullied and things like that, because other members in their team had to do things that they didn't want to do because of it. And I think that's where the challenge lies, is understanding the age cohort that you're actually working with, and what you've used the word punishment looks like as a collective. So that's all that I'd say with the physical side of it in a team setting.
Yeah, because of the younger ages, they're more trying to figure out themselves. They're trying to develop their own skill set. They're trying to figure out who they are as a person, even up to, mid to late teens.
Yeah.
When they enter adulthood, the onus should be, all right, you can rely on me. I know who I am, or roughly know who I am. Then I can try and slot in and try and find my place here and try and pick up the slack wherever I need to.
Yeah. And then so to do with that is something you got to remember is some families are shambles, whether or not, it's a poor upbringing or it's the other way, whereby the parents are never home because they're traveling around the world, or, dad's the CEO of a company or whatever. Then you can't punish a 12, 13, 14-year-old boy because he's continually late because his mum slept in and she's the reason why he's late. Like, he just ends up resenting his mum for that. So that's not his fault that he's late. So we have rules, we have standards, but you've also got to be understanding to the family and the social dynamics as well, where when they're 17, 18, if they're driving themselves to school and they're late, then that is their fault. Then that's why they need to get a little bit more accountability. And that's where you may dial up the antics a little bit, because of the fact that in those teenage years, we also know that that's where they get better at pushing the boundaries and strategically trying to navigate the rules. So if there is a firmer hand, the older they get, then that's fine too. But like I said, then that goes into adulthood. If you're an adult and you can't turn up to training on time or be prepared to train, then you need to question what your level of success is going to be. So that's all I think it is. I think just as coaches, we need to actually factor in the bigger picture of what that actually looks like in every family unit or family dynamic.
which goes to my next question. So I'm not too sure if you saw this. I was at Canterbury Bulldogs. So the coach Serraldo has been really trying to implement this really tough workhorse culture. And then some of the young players are really not getting it or understanding it. And I think they had about 6 players decide to just to walk away and leave the club. Then some of the veteran players, I think that one of the Morris brothers gave his 2 cents on it, on an opinion piece, saying that, when Des Hasler was there, that was a regular Monday or Tuesday, wrestling the whole team, for however long it was. So kind of like, what's your take on that?
So I think a lot of the big challenges that come with, and this is as athletes transition, and this is just purely anecdotally here, because my biggest thing that I've seen athletes either make it or not is because as a talented young or youth athlete, they will be in everything, and a lot of things will be spoon-fed to them. They're given everything. But then what ends up happening is, as soon as they sign a contract to make it in, whether it's a train trial, professional team, whatever, they might be in the lower grade tiers, whatever the sport may be, then they're on their own and they're not in school anymore. So school is easy because no matter how bad you are, you can just, that if you get on the train or the bus at a particular time, you're going to rock up at the school gates and everything's still done for you. All you have to do is be in the right gear, basically. Okay. And that's even loose within itself. But when you enter a professional club or a setup, you having the incorrect gear, not bringing this, or being late to training, this is what I'm talking about, the sporting values and lessons that are learned through sport from an early age. That's where they get lost. And what ends up happening is you have these super talented athletes come through. If they don't have the family support to help get them through it, then what ends up happening is they're left in no man's land because they're dumbfounded that they've signed a contract, they've got career aspirations to be professional. They don't know and have a clue what professional actually looks like. But next thing, they're getting reprimanded. And then when you talk about contact sessions and things like that, that makes it even worse. They're getting ridiculed in front of their peers through no fault of their own, other than just it's been a poor lack of preparation or education throughout their sporting journey to get them there. And then what ends up happening is they bail on the sport because they hate it. They don't want to be ostracized from the group. No one does. But they don't know any better, and they haven't been armed with a skill set to actually transfer into the professional ranks. And that's where I think the managers and things like that need to do a better job of transitioning players from school into a professional setup before they start making them too accountable. And a lot of good clubs do that, whereby they have them in houses, they have them in groups, they have them in, they teach them how to be real individuals, young adults and contributors to society before they start dumping the heavy load onto them when it comes to the professional expectations. So that's where I think they get lost. And unfortunately, we lose a lot of athletes who grew up loving playing sport, that were super successful and talented, but they get lost in the professional realm because no one's actually taught them or armed them with the skills of what it takes to succeed in the professional world.
Yeah, because I know Penrith Panthers have done a phenomenal job. I know Melbourne Storm, because Dave's doing some work with the Pathways program with the Storm at the moment, and they do a really good job in terms of trying to nurture that and trying to bring the kids up to speed with that as well. There's heaps of good programs out there, but I think sometimes when they've been at the tippy top for so long and they haven't developed any resiliency, haven't been smacked in the face essentially, what's been happening, and they haven't been told, okay, you need to work on this, or they haven't been hit with any inconvenient truth, then when they get to this top level, it's just like they just kind of like, oh, this is not what I expected. This is not what it's supposed to be. And then their expectations don't match up to reality. Then they just kind of fall off the bandwagon and potentially blame someone else for it.
Yeah, and then I'll even throw more to that, is that also happens at the extreme other end of professionals who have been playing sport for decades. They can't actually cook a meal for themselves. They wouldn't know how to open a bank account. They wouldn't know how to put a deposit on a house. They've never done it. So it works at the other end of the spectrum too, right? You end up having these 30-year-old babies who, struggle to tie their shoes up, okay, and have no life skills whatsoever because they've grown up in a footy team since they've been children and teenage boys. The only difference being is that they've actually got an income that far supersedes that they can get anything they want whenever they want it. And then all of a sudden they leave, they might be a club legend and they don't know how to actually do anything. So it works both ways, right? So if you can last in sport, it's one thing, but the skills that you're armed with, whether that's parents, managers, coaches, then I think that's an extremely valuable thing. And particularly a lot of the schools are going down that route too, of making sure that the individuals that they bring in and potentially offer scholarships too need to buy into the system and the model of the school, because you don't want to support bad habits whereby they leave school and feel like they can get away with anything, because that's not setting them up for any success in life or in professional sport.
No, 100%. I want to get your hot take on these Instagram posts, actually.
Are they mine, firstly?
They are yours, actually.
Oh, here we go. This is going to be problematic.
Yeah, you got your posing as well. Okay. So athletic development isn't about doing what others aren't, but preparing an ill-equipped generation of movers to tolerate the demands of sport. So you just want to give us your 2 cents on that. Just expand on that.
Yeah, so there's a common misconception that athletic development is a privilege, I suppose, in that it's only the elite private schools that do it, okay, or it's only rich families who can offer it, okay, utilizing services, in the private sector and whatnot. So, but the reason why I'm saying this is because as a generation, then they are ill-equipped to run out onto a sporting field on their Saturday or Sunday sporting fixture. When I say ill-equipped, I'm talking about from an injury prevention standpoint, through simple general movement patterns, or what we refer to as physical literacy, fundamental movement skills, to the point that we actually need to invest. And as I mentioned before, there's rural schools, there's schools that know the worth and have value and hold it in high regard, that they know that they need to build the athleticism or the physical competency of their students as a part of playing sport. But we've gone down the other route in that sport itself, everyone is chasing that specialized model and specialized realm, whereby they go out on a Saturday or Sunday and actually increase their exposure to injury because they don't have the physical resiliency, okay, they might be looking good in their sport because they're so specialized in it. They might be extremely strong in the gym. They might be extremely fast, but they don't have that chronic physical literacy that we did growing up, okay, to be able to withstand injuries that are occurring. So the main thing with that post is it's not about an elitist mindset that it's only available to rich families or elite private schools. It's actually something that we need to invest in from the ground up in order to set the kids up for success when they go out into the sporting arena to reduce the likelihood of injuries.
Real. All right, I'll give you another one. So for parents, understanding load and how it applies to your child may well be that what keeps them in sport for longer.
Yeah, so this goes back to what we were talking about before, in that we refer to it being training load, but to your average, parent, it's just about their commitments, okay, or their sporting commitment, their training commitment, whatever commitment you want to put onto it. It's about parents understanding, okay, well, maybe the best thing for my child or son, daughter, whatever, is to actually reduce their commitment. Like I said before, I used an example of giving them a day off. That day off will give them the opportunity to socialize with their peers, maybe find a boyfriend, girlfriend at the same time, and actually become a teenager, and at the same time, continue that spark and their love for playing a sport, rather than feeling that they're constantly run down and being kicked to the ground in more and more commitments that are thrown or thrust upon them. So it's just about parents understanding what training commitment or playing commitment means, and allowing them the freedom to move to actually be teenagers in the process and enjoy the process.
Cool. And the last one, unfortunately, sport alone isn't enough to build physical qualities of our emerging youth required to sustain it.
Yeah, so I suppose that is a little bit similar to the original question that you asked, in that a lot of people we want all our kids playing sport and having fun. The challenge that lies with that is that there's a huge amount of injuries and things that come from that, which shouldn't really happen if they were a little bit more physically prepared in the process. So the earlier that they engage with athletic development, such as, taking part with guys like yourselves in your domain or in the schooling sector, wherever it is, it's about engaging in athletic development to build that resiliency to allow them to actually perform in their sport. And we spoke about sport sampling and things like that before, which is great. And that does build resiliency and it does build transfer in between sports. But unfortunately, because we are dealing with a generation that are ill-equipped and haven't had the training or the exposure to physical activity like climbing trees, riding their skateboard out the front on the street, and just things like that growing up that we and the parents of today would have done, these students coming through, the athletes coming through, just simply haven't had that exposure. So they need to get moving. Basically, if they're not outside having a bit of fun with them, then the parents, then they actually need to start investing in the process as well. Maybe reduce the 3 or 4 sports they're doing and get them doing athletic development and coming to guys like yourselves and playing 1 to 2 sports a season rather than 3 to 4.
Yeah, just give them that large exposure to different movements. And
yeah.
Cool. And I guess to wrap it up, this has been a great conversation. What are the 3 key takeaways that you have for parents, I guess, for youth athlete development?
Yeah, so I'm hoping that at the end of this podcast episode that parents who are listening are seeing that there's a trend here, that basically we need to get the youth of today moving a lot earlier than what would normally take place. Okay, so if you want to call it, going back to the old days, but just having unstructured fun. Okay, so get them moving early, get them engaged in unstructured activities. And then the final one that I would say to them is that it's about trying to build that independent, becoming intrinsically motivated and independent in their actions that will allow them to succeed in sport. And by succeeding, it's not about making it in the professional realm. It's about success being that sport has taught them the valuable lessons of life that they can transfer into life while remaining active for life.
Sweet. I like it. Anything you want to add, Dave?
No, mate. Great episode. So many gold nuggets of information there, mate. I think this would be valuable for any parent, teacher, principal, sports trainer,
coach,
literally anyone who works with athletes or is interacting with any youth athlete of any standpoint, sporty or non-sporty. We've covered the benefits of strength training for not only for performance development, which I like what you call at Brisbane Grammar. It's not physical development, it's developing the performance, but also on the sporting arena and academically. We've covered everything from parents and psychology side of things, mate. It's been an absolute gold mine right here. So I thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks to both yourself, David, and Trent as well for having me on, and wishing you guys all the success with the athlete journey, I suppose, because parents are lucky to have you guys. The longer facilities are open like yourselves, and not only being open and offering a service, but what you guys are doing by doing what we're talking about exactly right now through this podcast is just investing in educating parents to empower them to make informed decisions moving forward. So I really appreciate the offer and coming on, and it's been a great chat.
I appreciate you coming on board for this podcast. But yeah, we'll leave it there for today. If you like this episode, please subscribe, like, share, all the wonderful stuff. We want to get the word out to as many people as possible. So we'll see you on the next one.
And lastly, if you would like to get in contact with Nathan or learn more about his book, you can find Nathan on Instagram.
Yeah, so you can reach out to me on Instagram, or it's probably easier to just go to nathanparnham.com and send me an inquiry there. It's probably the best way to go. I'm trying to limit my social media exposure these days, just for a variety of different reasons. But they can reach out to me there, and I'm more than happy to help out wherever I can with whoever it is. So thanks very much for the opportunity.
Thank you.
All right, see you later.
You have just listened to the Inner Athlete Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with the release of weekly episodes. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram to get great tips on all things youth athlete development and youth mentoring.